Thanks so much for your time. I am Pius Kojobaka. This evening, the International Monetary Fund is making a strong case for government to do more in the area of revenue mobilization to help save the fund program. The board raised this concern following the approval of the disbursement of $367 million to Ghana after passing the fourth review program. George Yafe has more.
The executive board of the IMF maintained that it is very important that government gives some attention to revenue because the success of the fund program will largely depend on this. It also wanted government to give some great attention when it comes to expenditure rationalization, a move that could go a long way to check the high deficit. On the banking sector, the IMF also wanted the Bank of Ghana to do more when it comes to further tightening of the policy rate to help bring inflation down further, as well as press ahead with programs aimed at strengthening the banking sector and tighten controls of the players in the industry. The $363 million that was approved by the IMF board yesterday should hit Bank of Ghana's account latest by this Friday.
And we know President John Mahama has revealed that the country's international reserves have reached 6 months of import cover. The development should mean that it is now more than $10.6 billion announced by the Bank of Ghana in April this year. Speaking at a meeting with members of the Council of State, the president disclosed that it could hit historic levels in the coming weeks.
We had left a free-for-all in the gold trading industry, and this country was hardly benefiting. I mean, in times past, we received only 50% of what we should get from our gold exports. Today, happily, the returns on gold exports has more than doubled, and that is responsible for part of the stability we're seeing in the currency. The establishment of the Gold Board was one of the important instruments in the reset agenda, and we made it illegal for any person unauthorized to buy gold and take it out of this country. And so the quantities have increased. Happily, the international price is good, and so we're seeing better forex inflows into our central bank, and it's also leading to an increase in our reserves. We currently have about 6 months of import cover, one of the highest in the last 15 years. If it continues, we are threatening to hit 10 months of import cover, which will be the highest we've ever had in the history of Ghana, and that should be able to be a buffer in terms of any global shocks that might come in the future.
Let's analyze these issues further. Joining us via Zoom is Macroeconomic Research Manager at GCB Bank PLC, Courage Poti. Courage, thank you so much for making time to speak to us here on Business Live. Now, following the successful approval of the disbursement of the $367 million after the passage of the fourth review program, the fund raised a number of concerns. One, of course, is revenue mobilization. And I'm wondering whether you are surprised by this concern raised by the fund.
No, not at all. It's been our bane, and it's you see, we are a nation, a developing nation. We have developmental needs and aspirations, and we need to spend to develop our nation, create the needed jobs for people, create the infrastructure that enable growth and all that. The limitation to that growth and expenditure part is that you are unable to generate enough revenue, and you also don't get as much donor support like you used to in the past. And that is when the borrowing kicks in to close the gap and the debt overhang and issues like that. We have a number of people evading taxes, not in the tax nets, and then the agenda or the tax revenue mobilization agenda always has been like, let's increase the tax rate for the identifiable groups without never really giving true meaning to the word expanding the tax net. So revenue mobilization is actually the key to solving most of our fiscal problems. Even if you control expenditure as much, there is only so much you can cut expenditure. But revenue had to grow if we need to fund our aspiration, build the schools, build the road, build the hospitals, and then the other facilities we want that can spare development. So I'm not surprised at all. And if you look at year after year after year, we have mostly missed our revenue targets. and almost expenditure containment measures have not yielded as commensurate containment as it should have been, and that is why the fiscal deficits are there. So the IMF spot on that we need revenue to grow, and we must pay attention to that.
I want you to explain to us how much of an importance is this concern raised by the fund, especially when it comes to access or otherwise of the fund program.
So you see, almost all the programs we've done in the past, the fiscal consolidation has been built on expenditure control. But for this very one, the focus has been on revenue growth more than expenditure control. And don't get me wrong, we are supposed to tame expenditure, but then the emphasis this time round is more on revenue growth, because that is the elephant in the room. If you raise enough revenue, you can be able to do most of the things you want to do. And there is a potential. We talk about our tax effects. We talk about 30% of the population paying taxes to take care of the needs of the entire population. And so you cannot overemphasize the need to raise revenue. The question has been, what are the ways to expand that tax net? The approaches we've been using. We've talked digitalization, all this well. Has it brought in new people? We've talked using Ghana card as tax identification number. Has it yielded a growth in tax revenue? And what are the other strategies? We've talked tax streamlining the tax exemptions regime to rake in more from the corporate sector. We've talked about property rates to be able to rake in revenue from the assemblies level, and different other strategies. Have they yielded the result? No. And so our potential still remains enormous, but we still collect a very insignificant tax revenue relative to what could have been from the total population. And so when IMF is hammering that, and when government is hammering that, it's a genuine problem. The solution may not be increasing the tax rates or introducing new ones, but it's about how do we get enough from the existing handles and from the population where everybody pays their bit. That is a puzzle we haven't solved yet. So revenue is very critical to our growth and development aspirations, unfortunately.
And at least over the period, we've seen government through the GRA embark on various tax reforms, among other policies, to shore up revenue. Again, do you think that it is a good start to mobilize revenue to achieve the target, thereby not truncating the disbursement of subsequent funds?
Well, IMF will still disburse the funds they committed to disburse to us anyway. So it's not about raise revenue and you not get disbursements and all that. But the revenue conversation, like I keep saying, cannot be overemphasized. And we need to now begin to look at it at both macro and micro level. At the micro level, which segments of the population are you identifying who can pay tax? As yourself, multimedia will deduct your tax even before a salary hits your account. For all those in the formal sector, same. But we have, according to statistical surveys, a very significant informal sector, going to about 40% of GDP, or even more. I mean, if I recall the last data correctly, if that informal segment of the market is able to, we find a mechanism that allows them to pay even half of what they are supposed to pay. We will not be depending a lot on some of these. Look, IMF is giving us 3 billion over 3 years, really. That's really no money. So we did not go under that program for the 3 billion necessarily. It helped, but it was to help us correct our imbalances and restore some credibility in the system. But if we can even get half of what we are supposed to get from the informal segment of the market, we should be freeing ourselves from some of the debt dependence. So DRA is doing their bit, but the changes or the increments are very incremental, like very marginal. There is a lot more that can be done. The question is, how do we do it? I don't have the answers, but I believe the answer lies somewhere in between being strict and then also creating the enabling environment for people to willingly pay tax. And there must be consequences for not doing so. Unfortunately, a lot of people have walked free without paying the due. They are due to the nation, and there are no consequences. There must be some fine balance between those extremes. Yeah.
Largely, what do you think this would send or signal it will send to the investor community? And as you point over that, President Mahama has again revealed that Ghana's international reserves has now increased to 6 months of import cover from the 4.7% we recorded over the period. And I'm saying this because it's the highest that the country has recorded in the last 15 years. How will this help build the needed balance to aid the cedi stability?
I remember we've been at 5 months at some point. Now 6 months, according to the president. Data is not yet out, but it's a good progress. And I have been asking myself this question that why did we not, all this while as a nation, consider gold as a viable way of building reserve? And whoever brought that idea, starting with the gold for reserve, the Bank of Ghana Gold Purchase Program, now to the gold board and the initiatives around it to own that segment of the small scale market, stop illicit outflow of gold without the nation benefiting and all that. It appears to be a masterstroke. And if we continue on this tangent, yes, we should build resilience against external shocks. The thing though is this: today, gold price is very strong and very high. And so we have reserves at those levels. If prices revert, and it's because of geopolitics and all that, if prices revert to mean where gold is known to be around the $17,700 per ton to $2,000 per ton levels, you would see a sharp contraction in your reserve. So it pays that we build enough to even build resilience even when prices fall to those levels.
Very well.
Now, if you fix your currency, you create the environment for foreign investors to come in, you create the environment for local businesses to plan, you fix their costs, input costs and all that, and that becomes a basis for you to grow your business sustainably and create jobs. And then we can talk about revenue mobilization from corporate taxes and personal taxes and all that.
Courage Buti, thank you so much for making time to speak to us here on Business Live. Let's shift focus to some other stories, which of course happens to be one of our lead stories. The average expenditure by each tourist and international visitor that came to Ghana in December 2024 was more than $2,600. And this was contained in the 2024 tourism report. We have more for you. And as we've been joined via Zoom by the chief executive of the Tourism Development Authority, Kobi Mensah, Professor Kobi Mensah joins us via Zoom for us to have this conversation. Thank you so much, sir, for agreeing to speak to us here on Business Live. From your end, as the chief executive of the Tourism Development Company, I'm wondering what your thoughts are following the release of this report.
Thank you for having me. I think that, first of all, let's say that we congratulate Ghana Tourism Authority. Obviously, mine is Ghana Tourism Development Company. For a fantastic work done, not only about the release of the report, but also the continuous, improvement that they keep moving, they keep, having for the tourism industry or the tourism sector. Now, if you realize the report indicates that, in terms of receipts, there was about 27% increase, year on year. That is from the 2023 to 2024. Now, bear in mind that 2024 was an election year. And so usually, when it comes to elections, tourists, especially to Africa, tend to slow down a little bit. So for them to have about 27% increase on the receipts between 2023 and 2024, that is commendable. And there is also a certain indication that is also commendable. That is domestic tourism. We have always said that if the foreign visitors cease to come, how do we resolve the issue of the gaps in our what you call tourism receipts? Now you realize that they did amazingly well, almost about 1.2 million arrivals, in terms of the domestic tourism, i.e., those who are actually in country, and then of course those who are actually Ghanaians but out of the country coming in. They actually formed about 1.4 million in total. That is actually commendable figures. Right. And then of course You can talk about, other things like the increase in business travel. You see my sector actually at 22%. I think that these are commendable figures that we must appreciate and actually commend the GTA for a good job done.
That's fine. The report showed that the country earned $4.8 billion. And from these international visitors we had, my question is, where did all these monies go?
Well, obviously, that would have to be directed towards the finance minister. Of course, the finance minister is the one that actually aggregates all these receipts, including other sectors. And so, obviously, I'm sure you've heard something like consolidated funds. I'm not in finance, so I'm not able to talk about them, but I'm sure the finance minister will be able to tell you about where the money is going.
We'll certainly find out from him. But with just little support, the sector is mobilizing all these monies for the economy. Do you think that it deserves more from the state?
Absolutely. I mean, it is no doubt that tourism had become one of the mainstays in most economies. I mean, we believe that perhaps we'll probably have to even broaden our sort of assessment and our monitoring, because we believe tourism by now it's actually even the number one. But because of the way we kind of define the tourism space, very limited, and so there are other receipts that we're not capturing. But we are of firm belief that perhaps tourism could be number one. And in fact, if we support the sector with the necessary, injections, necessary investment, necessary support, we're likely to hit record numbers in terms of receipts, in terms of, visits, and the country would definitely benefit. Of course, not to talk about, not to leave out the employment that it creates. I mean, this is a twin sector, tourism and hospitality. And so if you invest heavily, I'm sure the country will benefit. So we need a lot more investment into the space, and I'm sure we can do better than these numbers.
A quick one on this. The Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum, I should say, was most visited in Ghana. How much did it make for last year, and what are we to expect?
Well, clearly, if you look at the arrivals, Heritage, which is especially with Kwame Nkrumah, for example, has been the leading. Last year it was the leading, and now it's the leading as well. It means that if we do the right investment, we're going to achieve the right returns. But also it talks about the kind of interest that people have. No wonder Kwame Nkrumah is actually still leading, because obviously that's our biggest brand, globally. And so if we have to do the investment, we probably have to target, these areas. But of interest is also, Kakum National Park, which last year it wasn't the second. Now this year is second. Obviously, you have, Arboretum, which is in the, I think, Koforidua area, which is also the third. That tells you that ecotourism is actually emerging strongly. Although we used to have heritage in terms of our castles and forts, as prominent. Now it looks like it's been overtaken by areas like ecotourism, for example. So we'll probably use the report as a guide to look at where we invest heavily. Of course, one would also say that perhaps the forts and castles aren't in a very good shape, or maybe the taste or the expectations of the arrivals are actually changing. So we need to analyze it further to actually understand where we push the investment and where we promote heavily.
Professor Kobi Mensah, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us. We truly appreciate it. Still watching Business Live. We have more for you after this break. Welcome back to Business Live. Ghana's electricity consumption is projected to reach over 25,800 gigawatt hours in 2025, representing a 4.7% increase over expected consumption levels in 2024. This is according to Ghana Energy Outlook Report 2025, which highlights a steady rise in demand driven by population growth, industrial activity, and increasing access to power. Western Turkey has more.
Ghana's electricity demand is on the rise again, according to the latest Ghana Energy Outlook report for 2025. As of November 2024, the country consumed 22,410 gigawatt hours of electricity, a 4.6% increase compared to the same period in 2023. Total consumption for 2024 is expected to reach 24,688 gigawatt hours, up nearly 5% from last year. Projections for 2025 show further growth, with estimated consumption reaching 25,836 gigawatt hours, a 4.7% increase from 2024. The Electricity Company of Ghana, Cedi, remains the largest consumer, using over 15,000 gigawatt hours by November 2024. Its total usage is expected to hit 17,000 gigawatt hours in 2025, making up 68% of the country's electricity demand. The electricity loss as power is moved across the national grid have held steady at 3.9% and are expected to remain at that level through 2025.
And that's all we have for you by way of Business Live. I am Pius Kojobaka. We have more for you when you log on to myjoyonline.com/business. Grateful serving you.